I'm an 18-year-old male who has just been kicked out of the house my late father left me. Growing up, my family was never perfect. My mom and dad struggled to conceive for 4 years before I was born. A miracle, they said, after losing hope. But their happiness was short-lived. According to my grandma, their constant fights escalated, revolving around my dad's gambling and my mom's drinking, even while pregnant with me. Dad eventually gave up gambling, hoping mom would stop drinking, but she didn't uphold her end of the deal. Discovering hidden alcohol bottles, Dad gave her an ultimatum, threatening to leave if she didn't change. This infuriated Mom, leading to verbal and even physical abuse. My grandma recalls an incident where Mom threw scissors, injuring Dad's eye. Fast forward to now, my mom and stepdad have remodeled the house I inherited, turning my room into a nursery. They've called me a freeloader and kicked me out. I urgently need advice on where to start. Rushed to the doctor, Dad learned he had a partial corneal laceration that, fortunately, could be treated. He was told he was lucky it hadn't caused permanent vision loss. This scared Mom deeply, and she begged Dad not to press charges, promising to change. Reluctantly, Dad decided to let it go. When I was born, both parents were initially thrilled and tried their best to care for me. However, peace didn't last long. According to my grandma, Dad once returned home to find me crying uncontrollably in my nursery while Mom was passed out drunk on the sofa. Enraged, he woke her to confront her, but she dismissed it, claiming motherhood was tough and it was just one drink. Dad was on the brink of calling CPS if she hadn't calmed him down. Unfortunately, Mom began to hide her drinking, cleverly doing so only when Dad was away at work in the mornings. This often left me hungry and neglected, causing my health to deteriorate rapidly. When Grandma visited, she frequently found the house in disarray, dirty dishes piled high, sticky floors, and a general mess. I often wore dirty diapers or clothes, with my hair left uncombed. Whenever Grandma tried to discuss the state of the house or my well-being with Mom, she would become defensive and tell Grandma to mind her own business. Once, when Grandma visited and confronted Mom about her obvious daytime drunkenness, Mom could barely comprehend her words, giggling incoherently. My mom brushed off the concerns, insisting it wasn't a big deal. That's when my grandma decided she'd had enough. She stayed by my side all day to care for me. When Dad returned from work, she demanded that she take care of me for a few months so he could admit Mom to a rehabilitation center. Mom resisted, but Dad immediately agreed with Grandma. It was clear he also recognized that Mom needed help. While Mom was in rehab, I stayed with Grandma for a few months. It turned out to be the best time of my life. She bathed me, read stories to me every night, cooked healthy meals, and took me to the park to play. I didn't even realize these were things parents were supposed to do with their children. Grandma never yelled at me like Mom did, and she never punished me for accidents like breaking a plate. Living with Grandma made me feel safe. Over time, she became more like a mother to me than anyone else ever had. I'm incredibly grateful that she's my grandma because I don't know how I would have survived all those years without her. Dad visited me often during this time. He missed me dearly and would talk about how much Mom missed me too, eagerly waiting to get well so she could hold me again. Despite their words, I secretly dreaded going back to my parents' place. I wished I could stay with Grandma forever. After several months, Mom finally got sober and received her AA sobriety chip. Her first act was to drive to Grandma's place to visit me. It felt surreal seeing her again after all those months, like meeting someone I used to know. After Mom's visit, she appeared much healthier. Following a conversation between her and Grandma, I learned I would be moving back to my parents' place that weekend. Despite my protests and tears, Mom insisted that as my parent, I had no choice but to live with her again. Returning to my parents' home, filled with painful memories, was incredibly difficult. The emotional and mental toll of the move was evident. I began eating less and experiencing frequent bouts of vomiting. At just 5 years old, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder. My parents did everything they could to support me. We went to family therapy together to heal from our past and move forward. Gradually, things improved. The fights between my parents ceased, and Mom stopped drinking. She tried harder to be present in my life, and I started to trust her again. Dad even reduced his work hours to spend more time with us. However, our newfound stability was shattered one afternoon when Dad and I returned home from school unexpectedly. We walked in on Mom cheating on Dad with another man in our house. I was traumatized and Dad was speechless, his face flushed with embarrassment. He hurriedly told me to go upstairs while he confronted Mom and her affair partner, who fled in panic. From upstairs, I could hear them yelling at each other. Mom, true to her narcissistic nature, blamed Dad for her infidelity, claiming she felt pressured to be perfect and that this other person made her feel normal. It was a painful and confusing time for all of us. It seemed like no matter what Mom did, Dad was always disappointed in her because of her mistakes. He yelled that she was a coward and declared he was done with her, demanding she move out immediately. Mom pleaded with him, begging him not to be so cruel and insisting they needed to fix their marriage for the sake of me. That night, Grandma came to pick me up while my parents continued to argue. She had a few words for Mom but mostly stayed out of the conflict. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed with Grandma while Mom and Dad tried to sort things out at home. Mom called me daily, pretending to be concerned about me, but by then I knew her care was shallow and self-centered. I don't know if Dad's decision to stay with Mom was out of genuine love or simply because he was accustomed to their dysfunctional relationship. Nevertheless, he agreed to stay under the condition they attend marriage counseling. Despite his choice, I could never look at Mom the same way again after catching her with another man. I lost all respect for her. As if things couldn't get worse, just 3 months after the affair, Dad was diagnosed with stomach cancer. It started with severe cramps that caused him to collapse at work. Hospital tests revealed his health was rapidly declining, requiring immediate treatment. This marked the beginning of long days of chemotherapy and bed rest. Dad had to dip into his savings since he couldn't work while fighting cancer. Meanwhile, even Grandma was willing to lend a hand, but Mom wasn't pleased. She constantly complained about the draining expenses of Dad's treatments and doctor visits. Dad encouraged her to find a part-time job, promising to return to work and support her, as he always had once he recovered. Reluctantly, Mom took up a job as a server at a local restaurant. Her shifts were long, often keeping her out until late at night. Meanwhile, Grandma took on the responsibility of driving Dad to and from the hospital for his treatments. Our neighbor, whose daughter Shirley was my age, kindly offered to take me to school every day, which was a huge relief for us. Shirley and I became close friends, practically growing up together. Her parents knew about my family's struggles, partly because my parents' loud arguments weren't discreet. As Shirley and I became inseparable, they began inviting me over for meals. My dad saw no issue with this arrangement, and neither did I. However, Mom consistently criticized me for spending time at their house. She claimed they saw me as a charity case and treated me like a broken toy. Looking back, there may have been some truth to her words, but as I spent more time with Shirley and her family, I began to feel accepted as one of their own. Shirley's mom, upon learning I loved apple pie, made sure to bake one for me every week. On weekends, Shirley's dad taught me to play basketball, and we spent many evenings practicing together outside their garage. They truly became a second family to me. In time, it came as no surprise when Shirley and I began dating. She brought immense positivity into my life, and I am grateful every day that she's still my girlfriend, despite my tumultuous family history. Unfortunately, my mom has never warmed up to Shirley or her family over all these years. Despite this, Shirley's family has never let my mom's disapproval affect their affection and love for me. A year into Dad's battle with cancer, his doctors delivered devastating news. The chemotherapy was no longer effective, and he didn't have much time left. This news shattered us all. As a child, I struggled to comprehend losing the only parent who truly loved me and wrestled with grief every night. Dad spent his last months with me, Mom, and Grandma as much as possible. Then, one morning, he peacefully passed away in his sleep. I'll never forget the pain when I realized he wasn't waking up. I ran to Mom, who called 911 immediately. I couldn't bear to let them take Dad's body until Mom physically restrained me, comforting me as best she could. When Grandma arrived, her grief was palpable, and her presence helped me find some calm. The funeral proceeded without incident, but the true twist came when Dad's lawyer arrived to read his will. It was then revealed that Dad had left all his money in the house to me. My mom was stunned, even requesting to see the papers from the lawyer. I think Dad knew the kind of person she was and wanted. Dad had left his house and what little money remained after chemo to me, wanting me to have a solid start in life. Mom strongly opposed this, repeatedly questioning the lawyer about her options to contest the will, arguing that, as his wife, the house rightfully belonged to her. However, since Dad had updated his will while of sound mind before chemotherapy, her legal grounds were weak. Mom asked me what I wanted to do with the house. Despite her suggestion to sell it and move to a better location, I couldn't bear to part with the home that reminded me so much of Dad, especially so soon after losing him. Reluctantly, Mom had no choice but to continue living in the house, though I could see her disappointment. Not even 2 months later, Mom dropped a bombshell. She had met someone new and wanted me to meet him. Imagine my shock when I walked into the restaurant and saw none other than Andrew, the same man Dad and I had caught her with years ago. I recoiled in disgust and disbelief as Andrew extended his hand to greet me. I confronted Mom immediately, asking if this was the same man. She feigned surprise and urged me to sit down so she could explain. Refusing to shake Andrew's hand or acknowledge him, I was furious with Mom for even suggesting I meet him. She tried to justify their reconnection, claiming Andrew was just an old friend who had provided comfort after Dad's death. But there was something. Her explanations felt like lies, and their cozy behavior, including kissing, made me increasingly uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the memory of all those late nights she'd come home during Dad's illness, claiming overtime at work, but possibly meeting Andrew instead. Throughout the evening, I ignored Andrew's attempts at conversation. Later, Mom scolded me for being rude to her boyfriend, insisting it was disrespectful. She even mentioned they were considering marriage in the coming months, hoping Andrew would be a positive role model for me. Furious, I flatly refused, adamant that I didn't want him in my life. I made it clear that if they married, she'd have to move out because I'd rather live alone than with a man who had betrayed Dad while he was alive. Mom countered, reminding me I was underage and she was my parent, implying I had no say in the matter. Sadly, she was right. True to her word, she married Andrew soon after, and he moved into our home. Once settled, Andrew wasted no time asserting himself as the head of the household. He despised seeing pictures of Dad and me in the living room. One day after school, I discovered he'd taken them down and stashed them in the basement. When I confronted him angrily, he insisted it was time for Mom and him to start fresh. He allowed me to display pictures of Dad only in my bedroom. As if I didn't already have enough reasons to dislike him, Andrew turned out to be extremely controlling. He'd call Mom the moment her shift ended and would call again if she was even a minute late getting home. Gradually, he tried exerting the same control over me, but I shut him down firmly. I reminded him that he wasn't my father and that I would come and go as I pleased. With my own set of house keys, he couldn't lock me out. To clarify, I wasn't out partying. I spent my evenings at Shirley's or at the library, focusing on homework and studying. Throughout this time, I maintained a strong relationship with Grandma, visiting her often. We'd watch old movies or reminisce about the past. When I graduated from high school, Mom didn't bother attending the ceremony. While I hadn't expected much from her at that point, it still stung that my only parent showed no interest. Fortunately, Grandma and Shirley's parents were there to cheer me on. Later, as I was preparing to go out with friends, Mom entered my room to announce that she and Andrew believed I was now an adult and needed to take on more responsibility at home. Confused, I asked what she meant, pointing out that I already did my own dishes and laundry. She dropped the bombshell. Andrew felt I wasn't pulling my weight and expected me to find a job and start contributing financially to the household. I was furious that Mom couldn't even give me a single day to celebrate before dropping this bombshell on me. Despite my frustration, I agreed to contribute as much as I could. Over the next few weeks, I secured a job as a cashier at Burger King while simultaneously applying to various colleges. Eventually, I was accepted into a good college in town, which meant I could save on accommodation costs but needed a car for easier commuting. I approached Mom to ask if she could help me buy a car, but both Mom and Andrew immediately became angry. Andrew shouted that they were already doing enough for me with their tight budget, accusing me of selfishness without explaining why. Mom didn't defend me. Instead, she said I was on my own now and needed to figure things out as an adult. To my surprise, a few weeks later, I woke up to workers remodeling the kitchen and downstairs bathroom. When I questioned Mom about it, she explained that Andrew was tired of the house looking old and wanted to make some changes. I asked where they found the money for this when they claimed they couldn't help with a car. Mom grew frustrated, accusing me of entitlement for expecting their financial assistance. Over the next few weeks, I silently watched Mom and Andrew remodel and overhaul the house. I kept my feelings to myself, trying to keep the peace. Shirley could tell I was upset about. Shirley did her best to cheer me up, but when I returned home today, I found all my belongings strewn across the living room. I hurried to confront Mom about why they weren't in my room. That's when Andrew and Mom came downstairs, eager to share something important. Mom was pregnant with Andrew's child, a secret they'd kept for over 2 months. Andrew declared that as the father, he needed to prioritize his child's needs, and therefore, he had decided to convert my room into a nursery. Shocked, I listened as he insisted it was time for me to move out, claiming they couldn't support a freeloader any longer. Mom nodded in agreement, casually suggesting I could stay with Grandma until I could afford my own place. Tears welled up in my eyes. I felt so unwanted that I didn't bother arguing with them. I called an Uber and took my important documents to Grandma's place for the night. She's just as shocked and furious with Mom. She wanted to rush back and confront them, but I insisted on seeking legal advice first. Now that I've turned 18 and know the house rightfully belongs to me, I'm concerned about the process of removing Mom and Andrew from the premises. Do I need to consult with a lawyer for this? Update 1. I appreciate all your advice. I've taken the first step today by visiting my lawyer. To clarify my legal standing, the lawyer confirmed unequivocally that Mom and Andrew had no claim to the house per my dad's explicit will. They advised me to issue a formal eviction notice, which could be used to legally compel them to leave or face potential legal action. Armed with this knowledge, Grandma and I went to my house. With my keys in hand, I didn't bother ringing the doorbell. Thankfully, no one was home. I quickly called Shirley's dad, who agreed to help change the locks on the main and back doors. By the time Andrew and Mom returned, the locks had been replaced. I met them on the porch with Grandma by my side, refusing to let them enter. Andrew was livid, but Grandma, despite her stature, stood firm. She calmly informed them they had 30 days to vacate because I intended to sell the house, and their compliance was non-negotiable. I handed them a formal eviction notice signed by my lawyer, outlining their eviction period and the legal consequences of non-compliance. Andrew angrily snatched the paper from my hand and crumpled it, but Grandma warned him that destroying it wouldn't change a thing. They had 30 days, period. Seeing this unfold, Mom began pleading with me, emphasizing the stress of her pregnancy and the inconvenience of moving out. I was furious at her lack of support over the years and unleashed my pent-up emotions. I yelled at her for being a terrible mother, recounting all the times she had. I confronted Mom about how she had left me to fend for myself while she drank herself unconscious. I told her firmly that, as an adult, she needed to find her own place and stop living off me. Her expression turned horrified as I made it clear that she and her freeloading husband were no longer welcome in my home. Andrew tried to ignore me and force his way inside, but his keys no longer worked due to the changed locks. He erupted in anger, but I calmly threatened to call the police for trespassing on my property. It was satisfying to see him fuming, yet powerless. I warned them both that this was just the beginning of their troubles. If they didn't comply, not only would I sue them, but I'd ensure the legal battle drained their finances while I recovered my money from selling the house. I had nothing to lose, and made it clear that Grandma and I would be staying with them for the next 30 days to oversee their departure. Andrew and Mom were caught off guard and tried to argue, but I stood my ground. I reminded them that I was the owner and they were merely guests. If they didn't agree, they were free to stay at a motel, and I would move their belongings to the porch for them to collect the next morning. Their faces showed a mix of anger and desperation, but they knew I was serious. This was my house, my rules, and it was time for them to respect that. Update. Wow, I woke up today to find my post on TikTok, addressing the questions arising from my TikTok post. I live in a small town where people might recognize me from the video circulating. As for why I gave my mom and Andrew a 30-day legal notice, my lawyer advised it ensures they can't sue me later. Regarding the money Andrew spent on house remodeling, I'm willing to reimburse him if he provides verifiable bills. Concerning why Grandma and I are staying with them, it's to prevent them from claiming rights over the property they haven't paid rent for. I've denied them a key to ensure they can't assert residency. Grandma, practical as ever, insists on staying to ensure they leave promptly. Update 3. It's been a while since my last update. As some of you suspected, Mom and Andrew tried to resist moving out after the 30-day notice. However, anticipating their next move, I relocated all their belongings to the porch while they were at Mom's ultrasound appointment. When they returned and called the police, I calmly demonstrated my legal ownership and explained their lack of a house key. The police confirmed their only recourse was to pursue their case in court. Andrew shouted curses at me and advanced aggressively, but one of the officers cautioned him to calm down or face potential detention. Eventually, both my mom and Andrew were escorted off my property. It was satisfying to see them finally grasp the consequences of their actions. Since then, I've installed cameras throughout my property and arranged for a real estate agent to begin showing the house to prospective buyers next week.